Next panelist is Colonel Woolsey.
Right, morning everybody. In the interest of time, try and catch up a bit so we can have more time for discussion. I'll skip most of my slides, so apologies to the guys who were crafting it for the last week. So instead of the 10, I'll probably use about 3. Also, having listened to what's gone on so far, having listened to Chris Holdren at the beginning, a lot of the messages have obviously already been said, so I'm not going to repeat myself or certainly go over the same sorts of issues that are obviously all too apparent. What I will do though is I'll give you really just a quick look from my perspective as to what we're doing in HQDA. And just to reiterate, I'm the Division Chief for Stability Operations in HQDA G357. So we're basically responsible for strategy and policy for the Army for stability ops. They've also thrown in irregular warfare into the portfolio because we couldn't actually figure out what was the difference. We put them together and therefore we've somewhat sidestepped the conceptual debate, which eases our lives hugely. Okay, that's what we're working on for stability ops. I'm sure you've seen it. If you haven't, you should have. That's the definition from JP30. That's the one that's about to appear in FM30, which should be released in a couple of months' time. So it's got the 5 tasks that you see that roughly align with the US government tasks. And of course, the whole focus on the interagency is critical, and that's one that I'll touch on again shortly. The other part that I really want to emphasize is on the left-hand side, the full spectrum ops, offense, defense, and stability. There's military support in the US, but certainly for overseas, they're the main elements. So full spectrum ops is the Army's doctrine. That will be released in FM30, and that's what we do. Now, the point of driving that home is that it is the whole Army's business. And my job is to institutionalise stability ops in the Army, to try and get it bump-started, to serve as the catalyst for it. Okay? It is everybody's business. And therefore, when we start talking about these sorts of tasks, rule of law, security, penal systems, judiciary, essential services, etc., etc., it's not something that you guys say, oh yeah, that's our part of shit. No. It is everybody's core business. And the challenge that you've got to do is to figure out where you fit within this new paradigm. Now, the other thing that I always point out is that it was on another slide, not actually here, but is to emphasize that Phase 4, stability ops and Phase 4 are not synonymous. Stability ops runs throughout, from Phase 0 back to Phase 0. Okay, it is not just the old Phase 4. As was said earlier, actually the emphasis should be on Phase 0 and the shaping. That's where you get more bang for your buck. And therefore, what you need to do is to see how civil affairs is relevant in the steady security state, the era of persistent conflict for Phase 0. Not on mobilisation, but how you support the effort continuously for the next decades as this thing's likely to go on through. So the challenge is that I've basically got to try and raise the bar for the entire Army in all of these areas. Okay, if I grabbed anybody in uniform over in the Pentagon, we could have the discussion on advance, delay, withdrawal, etc., etc. But if I start talking to them about education, rule of law, judicial systems, penal systems, corrections, essential services, trash, etc., etc., then the eyes will glaze over. Less so, obviously, than a few years ago, but what we need to do is to raise the level of understanding for the entire Army. But what we do need, as well as raising that bar, we also need the specialist advice. And that's where you come in. So what we don't need are lots and lots of generalists. Because guess what? We're all going to be generalists. We need the sectoral specialists to give us that expert advice. And it has got to span out, not just into the NGOs and the interagency, but also private sector. So that's where we're looking for your expertise. I think this is probably the last slide I'll use. We've created an Army Action Plan for Stability Ops, which a lot of you have been involved in, particularly with the OCAR workshop last week. What we're trying to do is to firstly optimise the existing capabilities of the Army. So we'll take the JAG and we're getting them to look at interim judicial systems. Medics look at the host nation medical issues. Chaplains look at engaging with host nation religious leaders. Military police, well, they're training civilian police. They're not mandated to do so. They're not meant to do so legally, but they are. And a lot of these areas, what we're doing is we're optimising what we've got, although they're not necessarily mandated to do it. So what we're doing is telling them to look at their doctrine, education and training, and in due course maybe organisation to accomplish this. So a lot of these areas you'll see perhaps were civil affairs preserve, but we're trying to use our own specialists across the board and to increase the overall level of awareness. Now it's a two-pronged approach, as you see from this chart. The Army is moving into that gap, and we're also trying to drag the interagency into it as well to fill it. And of course that gets back down to DODD 3005, which you're all familiar with, I'm sure, and the element that says that the military have got to be prepared to conduct all tasks should the civilians not be there to do so. So the question of how far what constitutes be prepared to is a key issue. And what we've got to do is we've got to explore that limit of advance. What can we do now? What can we do with a stretch? What can we do if nobody else is there and we're left holding the baby for years? And of course we all turn over our shoulder, look for the interagency, or look for a host nation or look for international support, and it's not there. So we are left carrying that bag, so how do we better prepare ourselves for it? Now in terms of the interagency, I'm sure it's briefed over the last day or so, but there are a lot of good moves there. Some of it's just rhetoric, yes, but there are some tangible benefits as well, some advances. The interagency management system, I guess you've been briefed on, setting up the country reconstruction and stabilisation group, the integrated planning cell, the advanced civilian teams, and the field advanced civilian teams, i.e. the PRT equivalents. That process has been approved and will be used for the next contingency according to Secretary Rice. The Civilian Reserve Corps, what's that going to look like? How do you interface with that? So not only all the elements of the IMS, but also the CRC. At the moment, the CRC will be something between 2,000 and 4,000 people. They won't be like the ARC or the SRC, i.e. interagency people. These are contractors who will be on retainers, will have a certain amount of training, and will be mobilised. A true civilian reserve corps. What is the relationship of civil affairs to that? Indeed, have we effectively got our own CRC here? What I do find is that when I go around the various bazaars, people keep saying to me, civil affairs is broken. Now, okay, why? How? And I've got some of my guys looking into that. If that's the case, what can we do? How can we bring civil affairs into the 21st century? What is the role of civil affairs vis-à-vis stability ops when everybody is trying to increase their overall level of awareness? And these are some of the challenges that you face, definitely, and I face, because as well as looking across the Army, what we're